When you look at your grocery receipt, the pain you're feeling right now is largely driven by a massive spike in the cost of fertilizer. But the reason that chemical is so expensive, and the reason our food supply works the way it does, starts at the bottom of the ocean. The logistics and chemistry keeping billions of people fed today were engineered under the existential threat of a century-old global conflict, World War I. By 1914, Britain was a global superpower with a massive vulnerability. It imported 79% of its grain. Two-thirds of the calories its population consumed had to arrive on ships. That reliance became a crisis when German surface raiders and U-boats began hunting merchant vessels. The established global trade lanes were completely shattered. This graph shows the immediate economic devastation. You can see how UK import volumes dropped sharply to just 64% of their normal volume by 1918, while the line for Atlantic freight rates simultaneously doubles. Facing the very real threat of mass starvation, Allied governments were forced to shift their perspective. They began treating logistics and bulk oceanic transport strictly as a weapon of national survival. The first hurdle was financial. Neutral merchant fleets were paralyzed by war risk insurance premiums that had jumped to 30. With traditional grain routes through the Baltic and Black Seas severed by the war, European powers aggressively pivoted. They poured resources into developing North and South America into their new breadbaskets. This map shows how that desperate wartime rerouting formalized the circum-equatorial corridor. These became the permanent, high-volume lanes for global bulk grain transport. By engineering a way out of a transport crisis, these nations established the reliable 24/7 grain lines that integrate global markets today. That uninterrupted supply suppresses regional shortages and keeps a ceiling on food prices. While the logistics crisis played out on the water, a parallel crisis was unfolding in chemistry. In 1914, nitrogen, which is required for both agriculture and high explosives, had to be physically mined. The primary source was sodium nitrate from the deserts of Chile. The Allied naval blockade successfully severed Germany's access to South American saltpeter. Without it, they could not manufacture artillery shells. Desperate to keep their guns firing, German scientists scaled up the pre-war Haber-Bosch process. By combining hydrogen gas with nitrogen gas under intense pressure, they literally pulled the chemical out of the atmosphere. The Allies realized they were losing the chemical war and poured vast funds into catching up. In 1918, Britain began constructing its own massive inland synthetic ammonia plant at Billingham. Synthesizing nitrates domestically matched enemy firepower, and it solved a major logistical problem. Every ton of fertilizer manufactured at home freed up a valuable merchant ship to carry food instead of imported saltpeter. The sheer necessity of manufacturing explosives under a naval blockade pushed the technology to industrial scale, accidentally solving humanity's greatest agricultural bottleneck in the process. When the armistice was signed, this massive wartime infrastructure didn't shut down. The synthetic nitrates originally intended for artillery shells were simply redirected straight into the soil. Entire nations began utilizing this industrial chemistry to grow grain at scales previously thought impossible. This chart highlights the sheer scale of the agronomic revolution. You can see the historical baseline of about 1 ton per hectare around 1910. Compare that to the massive spike in modern yields, which have nearly tripled to about 3 tons per hectare. This artificially cheap, heavily subsidized nutrient meant farmers could grow significantly more food on the same amount of land. It offset massive global population growth and drove real food prices down for decades. Chemical abundance saved billions from starvation, but it quietly replaced our vulnerability to the natural limits of the soil with a total dependency on industrial infrastructure. In 1914, the entire global trade of natural Chilean saltpeter was barely 100,000 tons a year. Today, the world consumes over 112 million tons of synthetic nitrogen fertilizer annually. The physical logistics scaled up right alongside the chemistry. The WW1-era hubs that moved a fraction of cargo evolved into megaports, handling tens of millions of containers, keeping the global supply chain moving. Because modern yields completely rely on these massive chemical inputs, the cost of fertilizer now dictates the baseline expense of farming worldwide. This graph demonstrates the modern vulnerability. When geopolitical conflicts shock chemical supply chains, a spike in ammonia prices pushes wheat up by 20%. The World Bank reported a massive 35% jump in fertilizer prices, pulling your grocery costs up with it. When you walk down the aisle and see higher numbers on the price tags, you are looking at the bill for running these massive, highly sensitive industrial systems. Every time we buy groceries, we pay the ongoing maintenance cost of a global survival machine. One that was engineered under fire in 1914 and never turned off.